What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the Slaw Sports Show. As always, I'm your host, Cole Noble, aka Slaw. We're back here on another Wednesday to do another top five, Slaw's top five this week. Last week we did my top five breakout players. Had a lot of fun with that one as well. If you didn't check that out, it's on our YouTube channel. Should be the last video uploaded in as a video and not a live stream. So go back and check that one out if you missed it. It was a great episode, and we had a lot of fun breaking down our top five breakout players for this year's NFL season. But as for today, we are going to be breaking down our top five coaches that I think will be on the hot seat this year. So they got the butt warmers on and potentially might end up getting fired at the end of this 2021-2022 NFL season. So that's what we got for you today. As always, an honorable mention to kick it off, and then we'll get started. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with my, again, top five coaches I think are going to be on the hot seat this year in the NFL at the end of this season, and potentially even during the season. We could see one of these five coaches and a sixth honorable mention potentially get fired before they even make it through to the end of the season. But definitely once the season comes to a close, I can see multiple of these coaches end up getting fired, in my honest opinion, for what I'm predicting this year in the NFL. And we'll get all that squared away and pulled up as well. But again, going back to my predictions for the NFL season I have this year, which again, a lot of fun doing that as well if you haven't checked that one out. But we will have my predictions as well, which will hopefully make a little bit more sense when I'm, projecting these top five coaches I believe have the butt warmers on and are currently on the hot seat. All right, so let's go ahead and let's get started. Jump right into it here with my top five NFL head coaches I believe will be on the hot seat this year. But again, they're going to have a sixth one, an honorable mention. We're throwing in as well. We're going to start with the honorable mention and then, like always, go from 5 to 1 in order today of which ones I think will be the most likely being at the top. So let's go ahead with our honorable mention. And for my honorable mention of a head coach that I think is potentially going to be on the hot seat this year in the NFL, let's go to Houston. With the Houston Texans, new head coach in his first year as a head coach, David Culley. And David Culley, I think, in my opinion, was probably the weakest hire of this year's head coaching cycle. I didn't like that, I didn't like that signing at all by David Culley going to the Texans. Nick Cassiero is running things now as the GM of the Houston Texans. And so they brought him in with Nick Cassiero, and I just think it wasn't a strong hire. Personally, I would have loved to see Eric Bieniemy get the job in Houston. I think it could have eased maybe potential tensions with Deshaun Watson. But nevertheless, all of that's coming out now, and we most likely will not be seeing Deshaun Watson on the field as a Houston Texan at all this season. But David Culley coming in as a head coach for the Texans, I think it's pretty much just been thrown into a burning dumpster. And it's the easiest way to describe it. And pretty much his main job is to put out this burning dumpster fire with a gas tank, or a, just a gas can, I should say. He's in charge of getting this gas can and going into a burning dumpster and, plans to whack the dumpster fire and end up putting it out. So it's just overall a bad situation for David Culley. I don't think it was a great hire to begin with, just in terms of what David Culley has done in his career coming in from the Baltimore Ravens as an assistant coach. Actually has been an assistant coach for 40 plus years. So he has experience coaching, but never had an opportunity to be a head coach. So now his first time as a head coach. So an inexperienced head coach coming into a dumpster fire organization right now with all of that going on. It's just a recipe that's not going to work and is, just going to be a disaster more than it already is, in my opinion. When we projected the Houston Texans this season, I have them finishing 1-16 and a kindly 1-16. I think the Texans could even, not even win a single game and go 0-17 this year. I think that's how bad they are and how bad I think they're going to be this year. especially in that division. And with David Culley, I think it was a weird hire, but I think they thought process with the Houston Texans is that they're grooming Josh McCown to be the head coach of this team, and Josh McCown is just not ready. He wasn't ready this year to take that next step and become their head coach. So they're bringing in pretty much a stopgap guy in David Culley, a stepping stone, 1-year filler, and hope that next year Josh McCown is ready to go, or potentially even later on in this season if they move on from David Culley during this season. And it's an interesting thing to consider here. Considering David Culley just got hired, we're already talking about him potentially getting fired. So I want to do something real quick and go back and look at the stats here and look back at every first-year head coach who has been fired since the year 2000. And actually, we have 10 head coaches since the year 2000 that have been fired after their first year. So let's run through these and look back at some of these guys. In 2016, Chip Kelly was fired from the 49ers after going 2-14. Jim Tomsula, Niners again in 2015, the year before, went 5-11 and was fired. Mike Mularkey with the Jaguars in 2014, 2-14. 2012 went 2-14 as well. Hugh Jackson with the Raiders in 2011. Jim Mora with the Seahawks in 2009. Cam Cameron with the Dolphins in 2007. Art Shell with the Raiders in 2006. Marty Schottenheimer with the Redskins in 2001. Al Groh with the Jets in 2000. And most recently, the most recent NFL head coach that was fired after one season was Steve Wilkes with the Arizona Cardinals back in 2018. So it's not completely out of the question to see a first-year head coach get fired after 1 year. And I think out of all the ones that have been hired this year, not like it's something that's 10 in the last 21 years isn't obviously a consistent standing point to talk about. But out of all the first-year head coaches, the one that was the weakest hire will most likely be the one most likely to get fired after their first year. And I think that's going to be David Culley. Personally, just last year, Houston Texans weren't that good, even with Deshaun Watson and J.J. Watt, finished 4-12. And like I said, with this year, I'm projecting a maybe 1-win season for the Houston Texans. That's not going to cut it. Even if it is your first year as a head coach in the NFL, that's not going to cut it for the Houston Texans. And ultimately, this is going to be the grooming year for Josh McCown and get him ready to take the reins of this team and be the new head coach. So that's what I'm expecting for the Houston Texans after this year. But I'm going to throw it out there, David Culley, just because maybe he can't put out the fire with the gas can. Maybe you can end up knocking that fire out and putting it out and, may stick around for another year or two. We'll just have to see. That's the nature of the NFL. And the asterisks with all of our projections as well. But personally, I don't see anything going right for the Houston Texans this year at all, and I see David Culley potentially being out after his first year as the big man in the big chair. So now let's get to our top 5. My top 5 NFL head coaches, I believe, are on the hot seat. And number 5, we talked about the Arizona Cardinals. Let's talk about him again with Kliff Kingsbury. I got Kliff Kingsbury at number 5 as an NFL coach who I think is right now red hot on his hot seat. Just since coming into the NFL from Texas Tech, Kliff Kingsbury was thought to revolutionize the league and bring in the air raid and unique and innovative offensive scheme that the NFL hasn't seen in years. And he, Kliff Kingsbury ran that in Texas Tech, had success with it, brief success with that air raid offense, and now is going to hopefully bring it to the NFL and make it work. But his first year as head coach, he got paired with number 1 overall pick Kyler Murray, who's a dual threat guy, not really a mold for your air raid offense. So a lot of the offense has switched drastically with Kliff Kingsbury, and it's very much out of the realm of his offensive scheme he ran in Texas Tech, and he's been able to adapt to it and try to overcome with the new pieces he has. But last year, with the Arizona Cardinals bringing in DeAndre Hopkins, it looked like potentially maybe this air raid offense might start to come to life. Kyler Murray last season started to air the ball out a lot more. Last season he just started to air the ball a lot more, throwing more shots downfield. While some of them, like the Hail Murray, was obviously some Hail Mary attempts that doesn't really factor into it, but still they had a decent amount of deep ball attempts last year. Kyler Murray did, but ultimately the team still finished 17th in passing, and 7th in rushing, due in part to that dual threat ability of Kyler Murray. So still not that offensive scheme that really has made Kliff Kingsbury shine in his time at Texas Tech, which, by the way, even at Texas Tech, Kliff Kingsbury had a 35-40 record, a losing record overall in his career as a head coach at Texas Tech. I still don't really understand that how he made it to the NFL, but he's a great guy, and a lot of people and well-respected people in the NFL vouch for Kliff Kingsbury and the genius he is as an offensive play caller. But I think this year, entering into year 3 now as the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, this is his really make or break year. And year 3 is the typical make or break year for NFL head coaches. And Kliff Kingsbury last year finished 8-8 with the Arizona Cardinals, and they finished 3rd in the NFC West. And in 2019, they finished 5-10-1, 4th in the NFC West. So still hasn't made it to a playoffs. And that's why I say it's the make or break year here with Kliff Kingsbury, because that rookie contract with Kyler Murray is ticking down very quickly. And sooner or later, you're going to have to start making some big moves with this team in order to keep some things together. And more importantly, you look at the additions that this team has brought in, just on defense, J.J. Watt and Zaven Collins, and entering in year 2 with Isaiah Simmons, who I think will have a much better and improved year going into his sophomore campaign. Those are huge additions on their defense to help out that unit. But on the offense, bringing in A.J. Green and drafting Rondale Moore was huge in order to have a more spread out offense with this air raid spread offense that Kliff Kingsbury ran in college. This might be the first year he finally gets to really implement some of that scheme into the NFL finally, because he has all the pieces to do so. Christian Kirk, DeAndre Hopkins, Rondale Moore, A.J. Green, all those guys can easily be spread out 4 wide on the field at the same time. There's still that oddball in there that Larry Fitzgerald might end up returning, which gives them now 5 wide receivers to work with, and see what happens in training camp with Andy Isabella as well. Needless to say, there's a lot of options in this passing game for the Arizona Cardinals next year, and it's going to be the make or break year for this Kliff Kingsbury air raid offense to come to fruition finally, and a make or break year for Kliff Kingsbury as a head coach. Because I believe if Kliff Kingsbury doesn't have a good year next year, doesn't make the playoffs, he could potentially be a head coach that's on this hot seat and could end up getting some talks thrown his way at a potential firing at the end of the year. Could be one of those firings that don't necessarily see coming, but ends up happening. I can see that with Kliff Kingsbury. But last year they still had the number 6 total offense. And, they started 5-2 last year, had a great start, but just really, the entire season hit the fan after that 7th game. And they went end up losing 5, of their last 7 games to finish the season and missed out on the playoffs. This year, the Arizona Cardinals got to get that right, come back out of the gate really fast and get, the season moving along and progressing toward a potential playoff year, which is what I projected. Going back to my projections, I had the Cardinals going 9-8 and making it as a wild card team, one of the 3 wild card teams in the NFL playoffs. But yeah, so Kliff Kingsbury, it's a make or break year for, pretty much his job could be on the line. And it's a make or break as in make the playoffs. So I think that is the, really standing point of the Arizona Cardinals team this year is they got to get to the playoffs, and Kliff Kingsbury has to make sure that happens if he doesn't want to end up getting the boot after this season. All right, so now let's go to our number 4 NFL head coach I could see being on the hot seat this year. And let's go to Dallas, Texas, with head coach Mike McCarthy, former head coach of my Green Bay Packers, who I was not a big fan of during his time with Green Bay. But since being fired from Green Bay, Mike McCarthy took the years off in between, getting hired by the Cowboys and getting fired by the Packers. And supposedly was been in his basement studying up analytics. He's going to come back and be a revolutionary analytics guy. And the Cowboys hired him last year after moving on from Jason Garrett. And year one with Mike McCarthy had ups and downs, but had a lot of ups at the beginning of the year with Dak Prescott. And it looked like a very promising season for the Cowboys until ultimately Dak Prescott went down with his injury and was out for the year. And after that, in a terribly weak NFC East division, the NFC Beast, shout out. But a terrible division. The Cowboys still ended up finishing 6-10, finished third in the NFC East, and missed out in the playoffs when the winning team in the division finished 7-9 with the Washington football team. So Mike McCarthy this year, pretty much no excuses. He's got Dak Prescott coming back, has Micah Parsons now leading that defense. And just all around a lot more positive outlook on this season for Dallas Cowboys. Many people are thinking that they might be back. We had them, finishing pretty good. Making the playoffs at 9-8 was our projections. But nevertheless, my issue with Mike McCarthy comes from his scheme. He had a horrid scheme last year that was taken advantage of every single week. It seemed like with Andy Dalton at quarterback, and maybe it gets right this year with Dak Prescott. But that's something to keep an eye on. That comes straight from the top, straight from the coaching, and that is what needs to be improved. That could have nothing to do with the players if it comes straight from the top like that and from your coaching staff. And the other thing with the Dallas Cowboys is the fact that there was that rift. And it was reported from practices, insiders reporting it from the Cowboys. There's a rift between their players and their coaches, and that can't happen. Especially with a franchise as historic as the Dallas Cowboys and a historic man running that organization like Jerry Jones. He wants to make sure his ship has no holes in it and is perfectly patched up and running smooth sailing towards Super Bowl. That's how Jerry Jones is. That's how he always has been. And if he hears talk again of this year being rifts between his players and his coaching staffs, Jerry Jones isn't going to have that. And he's going to make something, make a move and make something happen, potentially with this coaching staff and Mike McCarthy. And with, keep in mind this whole ordeal with, can the Cowboys go to the playoffs? Here, year after year, it's the Cowboys. But if the Cowboys do make it back to the playoffs, it will be the first time they do it since 2018. So now going on 3 years since the Cowboys have made the playoffs. So this is an important year, especially, like I said, for an ownership and the Joneses family who needs a Super Bowl. Every year they shine and strive for a Super Bowl win, which should be the NFL way. A couple teams stray away from that year after year. But Jerry Jones always has his mind on the Lombardi. And if the Cowboys don't make it to the playoffs this year and have another horrid season like last year, where they finished as the 14th ranked offense and 23rd ranked defense, Jerry Jones ain't going to let that slide. With or without a rift between the coaching staff and the team. And I think Mike McCarthy, Big Mike, could be out of a job after his second year with the Cowboys, if that ends up being the case. But even if they do make playoffs, and there's still, a heartbreaking first round exit from the playoffs and potentially some controversy with the team going on, inside closed doors between the coaching staffs and the players, everything I've mentioned. If that happens again, playoffs or not, I still think Mike McCarthy could end up getting the boot next year with the Cowboys. It's looking like Kellen Moore is the guy getting really groomed for that role. And I could see that potentially happening as well, just like I talked about with Josh McCown and the Houston Texans. Same thing with Kellen Moore and the Dallas Cowboys. They're going to want to get him in there before another team steals him from him. And I think that's pretty much what their focal point is and their drive going forward for the future of their team if Mike McCarthy does not work out after this season. So that's why I have him as number 4 on my NFL hot seats. All right, so let's go to number 3, and we're going to go to Denver, Colorado with the Denver Broncos, and give me Vic Fangio at number 3 for my NFL head coaches I think will be on the hot seat this year. And this one's simple with Vic Fangio. A defensive guy, has been his entire career, and been in the NFL forever. It seems like this guy has constantly been here in the league and is a very well respected coach in this league. not just head coach, but what he's been able to do with defenses his entire career in the NFL. But this year, his defense is finally healthy again. And it's something Vic Fangio hasn't had in a while. Von Miller's back and fully healthy. They got Justin Simmons locked in, long-term deal. He's ready to shine. Bradley Chubb is back, and he's going to, hopefully have a healthy year in tandem with Von Miller as the edge rushers. Their cornerbacks might be the best unit out of any positional unit in the entire NFL. The Denver Broncos are loaded on the corner front. So this defense is finally healthy and ready to go. I said no more excuses with the Dallas Cowboys with Mike McCarthy. Same thing goes with Vic Fangio in this defense. Last year, the Broncos defense finished 21st in the NFL on that bottom tier in the NFL last year. And for a guy who's well respected as a defensive coach, Vic Fangio cannot let that slide going into this season with the defense back and fully healthy this year and going to be in a tough division with the Raiders, Chargers, and Chiefs. They've got to face 6 games out of this 17-game schedule. They got a tough schedule just outside of their division as well coming up for them. So Vic Fangio has to make sure this defense is ready to go. And ultimately with that division, pretty much last year, you look at it, Denver finished 1-5 in their division. They got to start winning some divisional games here in this division. And last year finished 5-11, finished 4th in the AFC West. Year before that, though, they finished 7-9 and finished 2nd in the AFC West. And, we're right there in the thick of it all the way up until the end of the year 2 years ago in 2019. So now Vic Fangio, he's got to get things right back on track, get back control of this team and get back control of this defense. And offensively, this one's the kicker. There's a quarterback issue going on that will go on into training camp, or not really an issue, but more of a competition. Open competition between Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater. Vic Fangio has to make sure that he makes the right decision with whoever his quarterback will be and go forward with the rest. Which quarterback he's going to go with for the rest of the season and for week 1. And ultimately, he's got to get some division wins and got to get a winning record here if he wants to keep his job in Denver. Let's go to my projections again for the Denver Broncos. We had them 7-10. So not a winning record. If you're the Denver Broncos at 7-10, I had them finishing 3rd in the AFC West. So Vic Fangio has got to get this defense on track, got to get them formed back together, mesh back together, get these guys back from injury, get these guys back in shape, and get them ready to go and hopefully be a top unit in the NFL. And Vic Fangio can hold his job. But that's, I think, a lot of big ifs. And a big if especially is still that quarterback position and if they will be able to hold up whoever they go with, Bridgewater or Drew Lock, whichever quarterback they choose. He has to make sure that decision is the right one and that this franchise starts going the right direction here. Or else Peyton might get a little bit upset with this team and the Broncos going forward and could end up, making a move away from Vic Fangio this year and look towards a potential new head coach. So a big decision is up front here with Vic Fangio, or George Payton might have to make a decision here going forward with this team. So I have him at number 3 on my NFL head coach hot seat for the 2021-2022 NFL season. All right, so let's now go to number 2 for my NFL head coach's hot seat. And let's go to Cincinnati with Zach Taylor. Zach Taylor, I think his seat is red hot, and for a huge reason. You look at what he has done since taking over with the Cincinnati Bengals, their head coach. In 2 seasons, 32 games, he has a total record of 6-25-1, which is the 7th worst record for a head coach's first 32 games in the NFL history, and by far the worst record in the first 32 games in Cincinnati Bengals history for Zach Taylor. And last year finished 4-11-1, last in the AFC North. The year before that finished 2-14, last in the AFC North. But again, last year, the year they drafted, 2019, that 2-14 year, the year they had the number 1 pick and took Joe Burrow. But even last year, I believe they were 2-6-1 with Joe Burrow before he went down with that ACL injury and ended up, just derailing the season. They finished 4-11, but it wasn't off to a hot start even when they had Joe Burrow. This year, Joe Burrow's coming back, hopefully being fully healthy. They brought in Ja'Marr Chase, brought in a lot of pieces to fill in some gaps. Jackson Carman hopefully will be an addition to their offensive line. They also added in Trey Hendrickson on defense. So they added in, Chidobe Awuzie also at corner, filled a lot of their holes to keep, this team competitive. But they will be in a very competitive division. And this division keeps getting tougher in the AFC North with the Pittsburgh Steelers, who might, might be Big Ben's last rodeo and last ride as a Pittsburgh Steeler. The Baltimore Ravens, Lamar Jackson is, most likely going to be year after year an MVP type candidate. And then the Browns with Baker Mayfield. Then, that entire team, Kevin Stefanski leading the way with the Cleveland Browns. And they're, really up and coming and will challenge for that division this year. But Zach Taylor, he needs to make sure Cincinnati shows some kind of improvement this year, especially in this division, and does something. Last year, 29th ranked offense, 26th ranked defense. And really, that can't happen with Joe Burrow coming back. There's a lot of promise with this guy. And, his career being the number 1 overall pick and, the year he had with LSU showed a little bit of that last year, showed a little bit of promise last year before going down with that ACL injury. But Zach Taylor, it's on him to make sure this goes forward. Another well-respected young guy in this league, Sean McVay especially speaks highly of Zach Taylor. And, Sean McVay, obviously one of the most well-respected head coaches in football right now. But Zach Taylor, he's got to make sure he gets this ship right and fixes Cincinnati now. This is a terrible organization, in my opinion, with the Cincinnati Bengals. And in my honest prediction, I think that Cincinnati will end up hitting the fan again this year. We had them finishing going 6-11 in their division, finishing last again. Joe Burrow, I think, has a decent year, but I'm not 100% sold on Joe Burrow. Never have been, and still not going into this year. And my honest prediction, I think Zach Taylor gets fired this year, and the Cincinnati Bengals will look towards Joe Brady and with the Carolina Panthers, the former offensive coordinator with the LSU Tigers, the former offensive coordinator for both Ja'Marr Chase and Joe Burrow when they went on to win the national championship in 2019. So I think Zach Taylor will get fired this year, and I do think Joe Brady will be that successor to come in from Cincinnati. It would not surprise me at all, and that's going to be pretty much my bold prediction, going into this 2021-2022 NFL season. So Zach Taylor, I think, is definitely red hot right now with this team. 7th worst record in NFL history for a head coach's first 32 games, and the worst record for a first 32 games as a head coach in Cincinnati Bengals history. I think Zach Taylor could be history after this year with the Cincinnati Bengals. All right, so now let's go to my number 1 head coach on the hot seat. We're going to go to the Chicago Bears. Matt Nagy's seat is red hot. He is on thin ice that is cracking right now with the Chicago Bears, and basically has been put on life support for 1 more year with their general manager as well. This is their last year to get it right, fix it, and prove themselves, both their GM and Matt Nagy. And Matt Nagy, who was supposedly going to be a QB guru when he came over as the head coach of the Chicago Bears back in 2019, he had quarterback issues in 2018 when he came in, when the Bears, I believe, went 12-4 in that season, and had a great year, went to the playoffs. That defense was phenomenal that year. But in 2019, 8-8, really downfall. We finished 3rd in the NFC North, and last year finished 8-8 again. Made the playoffs, however, but ultimately lost in the first round in the wild card to the New Orleans Saints, and finished ultimately 2nd in the NFC North. But this QB guru and Matt Nagy, he had issues all along last year with Nick Foles and Mitch Trubisky going back and forth. Who's going to be their quarterback? He kept pulling one out and putting the other in. There's just a lot of inconsistency at quarterback play with the Chicago Bears last year. This year, they moved on from Mitchell Trubisky. They brought in Andy Dalton, still kept Nick Foles as of now, and then ultimately traded up in the NFL draft and took Justin Fields out of Ohio State. And that's the quarterback issue. Because as of now, and leading up to training camp, it does look like Andy Dalton is the week 1 starter for the Chicago Bears, and I don't think that'll change. I think Andy Dalton's the guy for the first actually couple of games, potentially 5 or 6 to 7 games, the first, in that range, 5 to 7 games. Andy Dalton, I think, will be the starter at the start of the season before eventually Justin Fields takes over. But Matt Nagy has to make sure that he got it right, and their general manager as well with Justin Fields, and that he proves to be the savior for the Chicago Bears and finally, a competent quarterback this franchise hasn't had in a long time. But last year, they finished with the 26th overall offense and the 11th overall defense. The Chicago Bears have always had a good defense, right there, on the cusp of being a top 10 unit in the NFL. But that offense has always been horrendous, and Matt Nagy has to make sure he gets that right with either Andy Dalton or Justin Fields when they inevitably put him in as a starting quarterback at some point. But this is Matt Nagy's last shot to prove himself, and how much can he actually do to prove himself. We'll go again to our projections real quick. We had the Bears finishing 7-10 as well, third in the NFC North. That's not going to cut it in a last year prove it and prove your shot as the head coach of this team. So by that logic, Matt Nagy will be out. So going into this year, hottest seat in the NFL is in Chicago with head coach Matt Nagy. All right, so that's my top 5. That's my top 5 and my one honorable mention. NFL head coaches, I think, will be on the hot seat this year for the 2021-2022 NFL season. Thank you for stopping by, and thank you again for tuning in and always supporting the Slaw Sports Show. Hope you guys enjoyed. Check out some of our other content. We'll be going live on Friday night as always, and check out some of our past live streams. If you feel the urge to. Last Friday, we picked our NFL award predictions. So check that out as well if you haven't, and see what we have projected or predicting for the NFL awards. MVP, Offensive Player of the Year, down the whole list. We predicted all of them. So check that out as well. That's all we have for today. So again, thank you all for watching. We'll see you on Friday. And until next time, peace.